Hi everyone, welcome back. It's been a while, but we will continue our series on Java programming. So far, we have covered a pretty good number of topics, including multidimensional array function and overloading and all those things. And today's video, we'll be talking about classes. So class is one of the very important components of object-oriented programming languages like Java, right? In everything is class-based. So even though in Java 25, when we want to spin up, we can just use this main class. It's a compact file. Otherwise, we have to use class. So in today's video, I'll be talking about classes, how to create them, what exactly they achieve, and we will also look at how to create those and manipulate fields and methods, right? So let's go ahead and create a brand new file. So this time we will be creating class. Don't go for compact file. I will be creating a class. So, and I will exactly tell what class means, right? So I'll be creating class, and then the name can be anything. So I can say my class. But of course, in a real world application, if you are writing for some meaningful application, it could be different. Otherwise, let me just rename it. I will refactor it. Instead of, let's say, we are creating a class for some student related software. So I'll be representing a student. All right. And I will be refactoring it. So, all right. So student already exists. We'll be deleting it. So student access somewhere. Okay, that's why I'll be just writing user. All right, so I'll be defining a user class. Let's say your application has some user type, right? Uh, for example, Facebook has user. So, and this class, for example, in real world application, cars or trucks or something like that, they are object, like a real entity. And to represent those things, we have to create class, right? And so, for example, if I want to create user, let's say John or Smith, for example, I have to represent them in a common file called class, right? So what kind of attribute they have, what kind of behavior they perform, and so on. And this is what exactly class does. So that's why it is called a blueprint. And then it has some states, like the data attributes, and then also behavior. These also called methods, right? So so for example, I'll be defining fields for user. So what a user can have, let's imagine application, for example, it can have properties like, so what it can have, it can have a string name, and then it can also have, for example, integer a's it can have. And if you are building application, let's just not focus on one particular application, it can have, for example, salary if it is like kind of payroll management software, right? So we can represent that as double salary. And what else it can have? So it can have a lot of properties. It depends how many properties we can include or we want to include. And it depends on like the application requirement, right? So we are not required to list all the properties, all irrelevant properties. They are not required, but we can always list the very important properties here. So for example, and then we can also have address. And then what else we can have? Let's say we have different data types, so I will be including one boolean. So boolean is active. Let's say you just register the application, you might not be active by default, you may have to verify your email or phone number. So, and then you can have a string email. This kind of properties is something that you can have for users. And when we actually represent those things, with using object, we'll be defining, manipulating them, these fields for each user, right? So that means for each object, it will have its one state. So I will exactly show that. And for example, these are the fields, right? These are the fields. So the properties are, instant variables, and they are also called instant variables. Instance variable, or just properties, or you can call it like fields or something. They are instance variable because they are attached to particular instance, right? I will show you how to create instance. So when I say instance, I just mean object, right? But we also have different variables like class variable or class field. And when we write something like, static, and then integer, and let's say some value, so, and this is no longer instance variable, right? So this is related to static keyword. We will discuss it separately in next video, maybe next, or a few videos later. But this is not instance variable. All right, you have to keep that in mind. So we will look at this separately to understand how static keyword works in Java. But we will not worry about this at this moment. Just to keep in mind, just keep that in mind, that when you proceed something with static, it is not instance variable. And we can have like methods, for example. Okay, so what kind of methods? I can say, well, a display name, and then it will just print the name equals, and then name. All right. And then definitely when we create a function, right, it's just like a function syntax. So we have to proceed with return type. It can be like, display name, and then I can also say void or return give me and then address. Okay. And so, all right, so instead of void, I can say give me address. So that means string return type is going to be address return type. That means string. So and I can return this value. So return and then address. Okay. So this is how we define method, right? So for example, I can also say is user active. So because uh, the active type or is active is boolean, I can say the return type is boolean, right? Because I want to return whether the user is active or not. And based on that, if user is not active, I want to send email or something like that when user requests for login or something without being active, right? So is user active, this is like the boolean type, and then I will say is active equal true. If this is true, why this can be simplified to is active yes, but you can just say is active here. So the idea just gave us this suggestion, but it's same as doing this. Okay, so you can do either. If you want to say if it is not active and then just remove it. If you want to say is user not active, you can do that, right? I will just leave it like this just to be explicit, right? So this is how we defined any particular class in Java. So followed by class user. And so one of the things that I wanted to point out that many beginners get confused is the file name has to be exactly user, because I'm defining user.java. So that's not always true. This is true. For example, if you define this, this is going to be an error because the file public has to be the same as this one. But if you omit this public and then write instead of user, if you write my user, it's still going to be valid. So one file can have only one public class. So, and then that public class, if defined, it is not required that we define public class. It is not a necessity, right? It is a common practice, a convention, right? But it's not always required. But if you do so, it has to match. In fact, it must match the file name with the class name. So my user. But if you omit this one, and you can write anything. And even in a single file, I can write another class, a demo, for example, or let's say user and class, and then role, and then I can do so, right? It does not have to be only one class, but I cannot name it public because this file is user.java, so the public class can never be other than this, right? So this was like a, I think, a good tip for you guys. And then this, well, so when we have to create a method or something, well, I can do like in a different way. So, but for now, I will be creating main method. So where we will create objects and then manipulate this field. All right. So you can just say main. Since it's Java 25, so I don't need to write this public static void main and then even string and then arguments. This is being optional, so it's because of Java 25, but just write it. But if you are using Java versions or not other than 25, you have to write it. So that's why I'm writing it. And here, so when you want to create an object, like I said, this is just a class. Class by default doesn't do anything, right? It's just like a blueprint. It's like a design. You have to execute. You have to create it. It's like constructing a building from the particular design, right? With the particular design, you can create as many buildings as you want, right? So I want to create normal user, right? So let's say when I want to create an object, I have to do new, and then this new keyword is to create an object, and then the class name, so user, and then close and opening parenthesis, right? So when you do this, we can get user type and then normal, or let's say John user, right? So this is an object. So what does this have? This object called John user is just a reference to the memory, and now it does not have anything, right? So if you do s out John user dot, for example, if you do name, or you can say display name, right? You will not have anything. Okay, so display name is just void. That's why we cannot return. We have to write it and then s out. And then I can also say is user active. For example, John user dot is user active, right? So by default, it should be false, right? It's going to probably take default value. And I'm gonna run it, and then you will see the result. So name equals null and then false. This is because when you define instance variable or fields like these, they will take default value. And then for a string, default is null. And then for integer, default is 0. And then for default, double, it is going to be 0, 0.0. And for a string, because this is like a class type, it's going to be null, right? So for even email is going to be null. So, but we don't want that, right? We want to have some properties attached to this John. Okay. So now I will be attaching John. So John user that I want to assign some value. For example, in name, for example, John Doe, right? And then for is active, let's say John user dot is active, and I will say true. And then zone user dot and then address, for example, United States. And if I print this field now, just I'm calling this function because it doesn't return anything, and I'm printing directly here. And then the return value will be printed because it returns boolean, so boolean value is going to be there. So, and if I run it again, we will see the result that we assigned. So name is going to be John Doe, and then the Boolean is active is true because that's what we assigned. And we are not limited to that. We can now define another user. Okay, so another user, but this name has to be different. So David and then user, right? And David user dot name equals to David, and I will duplicate it. So it's Control D or Command D if you are using Mac, and David user dot address, and then let's say some country in Europe. All right. So and if you print it, so David user dot display name, you will display the name, and then David user dot get, sorry, we don't have any get, just like is dot address, and I can even print give me address, and let's see if give me address actually return address. It returns, so I can print it because that is throwing us the value, so we have to catch it, right? So and let me run this. Okay, and there we go. So name equals David and then Europe, right? In the similar way, you can actually create another user. So depending on, on your need, and then you can also manipulate every single field depending on the type. So if it is, let's say, long, you have to proceed with L. And so I wanted to show this value. For example, if I do value plus plus, so increment value, right? So default value, I'll be giving 0 explicitly. I also want to show, but we will come to static because it has more rules. Let's say increment static, increment value. So increment value, and then I will just say value and then plus plus and void. So increment value plus plus, okay, and increment value. So I'll just do John user dot increment value. So John user dot increment value, and then I will also print increment value. Okay, so value. I'll say value equals value, and then and David user also increment value dot increment value, and s out value equals and then value. And if I print these things, and let's see what happens. Now look at this, value 2 and value 1. This is because static variables are shared for every instances we create throughout the class, right? So, but if this value, let me show you one thing quickly. If I change this, you will see the difference, right? If you change or remove this static to non-static, here we see 1, 2, you will see result different. Let me show you. All right. Okay. So, okay. Um, all right. So instead of value, I will say s out, no, get value. So int get value, and then return value. Okay. And instead of now value, I will say get value, and it has to be zone user dot get value, right? And value equals David user dot value because get value. So if I run it now, value is also 1 and value is also 1. So as long as you change it to non-static, it is, resets. It resets for each and every instance you create, right? So that's why you have to be very careful. So I will just undo it a couple of times to go back to the same stage we were in. Okay, so right now, and if I run it, this is a quick tip for you. So if you define anything static in a class, it will be shared for all the instances you create, right? So it makes sense. Well, if you want to know how many objects you created, in those situations, if there is a common field that you want to access for everything, every instance, right? So which is common for everything. So can just use static variables. All right. So that was it for this video. You have to define this, and we will come to package modifier. So if you have seen somewhere like this private or something, you can define it here. It's perfectly fine, but we will come at those modifiers later. And then we will also write better method names in coming videos. And if you want to define something like this, we will come back, and we can also pass arguments. So we will come at those when we come to constructors. And other than that, this is pretty much it. And this is like a really one of the most fundamental things that you have to study, especially when you want to work in Java field. All right, so that was it for today's video. I hope it will be useful. So if you like it, please come give me a thumbs up. And also, if you have any comment, please write down in the comment section. And I will see you in the next one. Thank you for watching this video.